Captain Alexis Viper Thompson had never doubted her place in the sky. At 28, she was the youngest pilot to ever achieve A status at Thunderbolt Air Force Base, her reflexes sharper than a hawk's and her tactical instincts bordering on supernatural. When enemy aircraft appeared on radar screens, other pilots reached for their manuals. Alexis reached for the afterburners. But in 3 years, she would be sitting behind a desk, stripped of her wings and branded unfit for service, while hostile. Aircraft threatened American airspace at speeds no one else could match. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert sun was just beginning to paint the Nevada sky in shades of amber when Alexis completed her morning pre-flight inspection. Her F-22 Raptor, tail number 074145, gleamed like a predator waiting to hunt. She ran her fingers along the aircraft's sleek surface, checking every panel, every rivet, every system with the meticulous attention that had earned her the respect of mechanics twice her age. "Still talking to your bird, Viper?" Major Deanna Cross approached from across the tarmac, her flight suit bearing the patches of someone who'd flown combat missions over 3 different continents. Diana had been Alexis's mentor since her arrival at Thunderbolt 3 years ago, and she was one of the few people who understood that the young pilot's relationship with her aircraft went beyond professional, it was spiritual. "She's not just a machine," Alexis replied, her voice carrying the soft Texas drawl that became more pronounced when she was focused. "She's got a soul, and she needs to know I'm listening." Diana smiled, remembering her own early days when the line between pilot and aircraft seemed to blur during high-G maneuvers. "Well, your soulmate just got clearance for the morning cap mission." Intelligence picked up some unusual radio chatter from across the border. Probably nothing but command. "Wants eyes in the sky." Combat air patrol missions were routine, but Alexis never treated them as such. Every flight was an opportunity to push both herself and her aircraft to new levels of performance. She'd spent countless hours studying aerodynamics textbooks that most pilots never touched, memorizing performance charts for scenarios that training manuals deemed impossible, and practicing maneuvers that existed only in theoretical discussions. Among test pilots, her colleagues often found her in the hangar at midnight, not socializing or unwinding like other pilots, but studying maintenance manuals and talking with the ground crew about engine modifications and system optimizations. While other pilots were content to master the basics, Alexis was obsessed with understanding every microscopic detail of supersonic flight dynamics. "Thompson, you're cleared for immediate departure," came the voice of air traffic control through her headset as she settled into the cockpit. The familiar embrace of the ejection seat felt like coming home. Her hands moved across the instrument panel with practiced precision, each switch and button an extension of her own nervous system. "Thunderbolt Control, this is Viper 1, requesting permission to go supersonic over the range," she called, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "Viper 1, you're cleared for Mach 2 testing. Range is clear, ceiling unlimited. Have fun up there." The words were barely out of the controller's mouth before Alexis felt the familiar push of acceleration pressing her back into her seat. F-22's twin Pratt and Whitney engines roared to life with 35,000 pounds of thrust each, transforming fuel and air into pure velocity. The desert floor dropped away beneath her as she climbed through 10,000 feet, then 20,000, then 30,000. The thin air offering less resistance to her aircraft's knife-edge design that at 40,000 feet, she pushed the throttles forward into afterburner territory. The acceleration was immediate and intoxicating, a force that pressed against her chest and made her vision tunnel slightly as G-forces built. The Mach meter climbed steadily, 1.1, 1.3, 1.5. The aircraft was no longer flying through the air, but carving through it like a bullet through water. Mach 1.8 in climbing, she reported. Her voice calm despite traveling at speeds that would kill most people if they were exposed to the wind stream. All systems nominal, airframe stable. But something else was happening up there in the thin air above the Nevada desert. Her radar scope, which should have been empty except for a few commercial aircraft following established airways, was showing something unusual. Multiple contacts moving fast and information approaching from the southwest at an altitude that suggested they weren't following any flight plan filed with civilian authorities. Control, I'm picking up multiple fast movers bearing 220, approximately 80 nautical miles in closing. Are we expecting any exercises today? The radio crackled with static before the controller's voice returned, tension evident in his tone. Negative, Viper 1. All exercises are canceled for today. Can you get an identification on those contacts? Alexis banked her aircraft toward the unknown radar signatures, her training taking over as adrenaline sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. This was no longer a routine patrol. This was potentially the real thing. Enemy aircraft had penetrated American airspace, and she was the only pilot in position to intercept them. As she closed the distance, her radar warning receiver began painting a picture that made her blood run cold. The signatures weren't commercial aircraft or even friendly military jets. The electronic fingerprints were consistent with foreign military fighters, advanced models that had no business being anywhere near American airspace without proper diplomatic coordination. Control, I have visual contact, she reported her F-22 now traveling at Mach 2.1 as she closed within visual range of the intruders. Through her canopy, she could see them clearly, sleek, angular aircraft with markings she didn't recognize, flying in tight formation and maintaining radio silence. They were clearly military, clearly foreign, and clearly where they shouldn't be. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she was about to make the most important decision of her career. These aircraft represented a potential threat to national security, and she was the only American pilot in position to respond. Everything she'd trained for, every hour she'd spent perfecting her skills, had led to this moment suspended 6 miles above the earth at twice the speed of sound. Lead aircraft in the formation seemed to notice her approach and began a climbing turn that would bring them into direct confrontation. In 30 seconds, Captain Alexis Thompson would have to decide whether to engage unknown aircraft in American airspace, a decision that could either save lives or start an international incident. She checked her weapon systems one final time, her fingers dancing across controls she'd practiced with thousands of times, but never used in anger. The moment of truth was approaching at 1,400 miles per hour, and there would be no time for hesitation once it arrived. Control, she said, voice carrying the calm authority that had made her legendary among her peers. I'm going in. The mission briefing that morning had seemed routine, just another training exercise designed to test readiness protocols. Colonel Raymond Fletcher stood at the front of the briefing room, his weathered face bearing the scars of someone who'd seen combat in 3 different theaters. His service record was impeccable: Distinguished Flying Cross, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, the kind of decorations that commanded immediate respect from junior officers. Today's exercise will test our rapid response capabilities, Fletcher announced to the assembled pilots of the 42nd Fighter Squadron, Iron Eagles. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. We've got intelligence suggesting increased activity along our southwestern borders. Nothing confirmed, but command wants us ready for anything. Alexis sat in the front row, her notebook filled with technical specifications and tactical notes that went far beyond what most pilots bothered to record. While her colleagues scribbled basic mission parameters, she was analyzing potential intercept vectors, calculating fuel consumption rates at various altitudes, and mentally rehearsing emergency procedures that weren't even part of the standard curriculum. Thompson, Fletcher's voice cut through her concentration. "You'll be flying as my wingman today. We'll be conducting high-altitude reconnaissance over Grid Square Echo 7. The assignment surprised her. Colonel Fletcher rarely flew training missions anymore, preferring to oversee operations from the ground. When he did take to the skies, it was usually with senior pilots who matched his rank and experience. Taking the captain as his wingman, even one with Alexis's reputation, was unusual. Major Diana Cross caught Alexis's eye from across the briefing room, her expression showing the same confusion. Diana had been expecting to fly with Fletcher herself, having been scheduled as his partner for the past 3 similar exercises. The last-minute change felt arbitrary, almost personal. After the briefing, Diana pulled Alexis aside in the hallway. Outside the operations center. "Be careful up there," she said, her voice low enough that other pilots couldn't overhear. "Fletcher's been acting strange lately. Moody, unpredictable. Last week he grounded Lieutenant Torres for questioning a navigation route that was clearly wrong." "Strange how?" Alexis asked, though she'd noticed the same behavioral changes Diana was describing. Fletcher had always been demanding, but recently, his critiques had become personal, his temper shorter, and his decision-making increasingly erratic. Missing briefings, showing up late to formations, and when he is present, he seems... Diana paused, choosing her words carefully. "Distracted, like his mind is somewhere else entirely. Just watch yourself, okay?" The pre-flight inspection of Fletcher's F-22 revealed nothing obviously wrong, but Alexis noticed details that troubled her professional instincts. The colonel's flight suit smelled faintly of something she couldn't identify, not the usual odors of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid that clung to all pilots, but something sharper, more chemical. His hand shook slightly as he signed the maintenance logs, a tremor that could be attributed to caffeine or stress, but seemed more pronounced than normal. "Thompson," Fletcher said as they walked toward their aircraft, "today's exercise is classified at a higher level than usual. Whatever happens up there, whatever we encounter, the details stay between us. Understood?" The statement struck Alexis as odd. Training exercises weren't typically classified beyond standard operational security protocols, and Fletcher's emphasis on secrecy felt unnecessary for what should have been routine reconnaissance. But questioning a superior officer's instructions wasn't something junior pilots did lightly, especially not someone with Fletcher's combat record and reputation. "Understood, sir," she replied, though unease continued to gnaw at her professional instincts. The takeoff proceeded normally, both aircraft lifting off from Thunderbolt's primary runway within seconds of each other. Fletcher took the lead position, with Alexis maintaining standard formation, spacing approximately 500 feet behind and to his right. The Nevada landscape spread beneath them like a vast canvas of browns and reds, punctuated by the occasional road or small town that looked like scattered toys from their altitude. "Control, Iron Eagle lead requesting permission to climb to Angels 40, Fletcher radioed, using military terminology for 40,000 feet. His voice sounded normal over the radio, professional and controlled, but something in his flight pattern troubled Alexis. His aircraft was weaving slightly, making small corrections that suggested either equipment problems or pilot distraction. "Iron Eagle lead, you're cleared to 40,000. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited." As they climbed through 30,000 feet, Alexis noticed that Fletcher's radio discipline was becoming sloppy. He was taking longer than usual to respond to air traffic control. His transmissions were becoming shorter and less detailed, and twice he'd used incorrect call signs. Small mistakes, but the kind that could become dangerous at supersonic speeds, where split-second communication was essential. At 38,000 feet, Fletcher's aircraft suddenly banked hard to the left without radio warning, forcing Alexis to break formation to avoid a collision. "Lead, you're drifting out of formation," she called, professional concern evident in her voice. Copy that too. Just adjusting for wind. Fletcher's response came after a delay that suggested he'd been momentarily confused about his position. Radar scope in Alexis's cockpit was beginning to paint a picture that made her pulse quicken. Multiple contacts were appearing on the edge of her detection range, fast-moving objects that weren't following civilian flight patterns. Their electronic signatures were unfamiliar, definitely military, and definitely not American. Lead, I'm showing multiple bogies bearing 220, approximately 60 nautical miles and closing fast. Are you seeing this? Fletcher's response was delayed and confused. What contacts? A knot. My radar must be malfunctioning. Alexis's training kicked in as she realized something was seriously wrong. Either Fletcher's aircraft was experiencing multiple system failures, or something was affecting his ability to process information correctly. The contacts on her radar were real. She could see them visually now. Dark specks against the desert sky that were growing larger by the second. Control, this is Iron Eagle 2, she transmitted, breaking protocol by communicating directly with base instead of going through Fletcher. I have multiple unknown aircraft, possibly hostile, approaching Grid Square Echo 7. Request immediate guidance. Iron Eagle 2, say again your last transmission. Came the confused response from air traffic control. Before she could respond, Fletcher's voice crackled over the radio, slurred and uncertain. Thompson, you're seeing things. There's nothing out here. We're heading back to base. But Alexis could see them clearly now, at least 4 aircraft in tight formation, flying at high speed toward what appeared to be a predetermined target deeper in American airspace. These weren't training aircraft or friendly forces conducting exercises. These were foreign military jets that had somehow penetrated one of the most heavily monitored airspaces in the world. Fletcher was turning his aircraft toward home, apparently unaware of or unwilling to acknowledge the threat developing directly in front of them. In 30 seconds, the unknown aircraft would be past their position and heading toward populated areas with unknown intentions. Alexis faced a choice that would define her entire career: follow her commanding officer's orders to return to base, or trust her own judgment and intercept what appeared to be a genuine threat to national security. The decision came to her with crystalline clarity. She'd sworn an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't include an exception for following orders from superior officers who might be compromised. Control, Iron Eagle 2 is breaking formation to investigate unknown contacts. Colonel Fletcher appears to be experiencing equipment malfunctions. As she banked her F-22 toward the approaching aircraft and pushed her throttles into afterburner, Alexis had no idea that her decision to trust her training over her commanding officer would soon cost her everything she'd worked to achieve. The afterburners engaged with a roar that Alexis felt in her bones, transforming her F-22 from a graceful aircraft into a guided missile with a human brain. The thrust pushed her back into her ejection seat as the Mach meter climbed rapidly. 1.2, 1.4, 1.6. The unknown aircraft were now clearly visible on her heads-up display. 4 sleek fighters maintaining tight formation and flying, with the precision that spoke of extensive training and hostile intent. Unknown aircraft, unknown aircraft. This is United States Air Force Captain Thompson. You are in violation of American airspace. Identify yourself immediately and change course to bearing 090. The response was silence, but she could see the lead aircraft beginning an evasive maneuver that confirmed her worst fears. These weren't lost pilots or aircraft experiencing navigation problems. They were foreign military jets conducting what appeared to be a deliberate incursion into sovereign American territory. Behind her, Fletcher's voice crackled over the radio, panic creeping into his transmission. Thompson, what the hell are you doing? I ordered you to return to base. Sir, we have confirmed hostile aircraft penetrating American airspace, she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I'm executing standard intercept procedures. There are no hostile aircraft. You're hallucinating. Return to formation immediately." But Alexis could see them with her own eyes now, close enough to make out details of their design. The aircraft were advanced models, possibly Russian or Chinese origin, with stealth characteristics that explained how they'd penetrated so deeply into American territory without being detected by ground-based radar systems. Their angular surfaces and minimal radar cross-section suggested state-of-the-art technology. The lead aircraft suddenly broke formation and began climbing, apparently trying to gain altitude advantage for a potential engagement. This was no longer reconnaissance, this was combat maneuvering by pilots who understood they'd been detected and were preparing to fight their way out of American airspace. "Control, this is Iron Eagle 2, Alexis transmitted, pushing her F-22 past Mach 1.8 as she climbed to match the lead intruder's altitude. "I have 4 confirmed hostile aircraft, foreign military designation unknown, engaging in combat maneuvers. Request immediate backup and weapons authorization." The radio crackled with confused voices as air traffic controllers struggled to understand what was happening. Training exercises didn't typically involve reports of hostile aircraft, and the confusion in Fletcher's contradictory reports was making it difficult for ground personnel to assess the true nature of the situation. "Iron Eagle 2, we show no hostile aircraft on ground radar. Colonel Fletcher reports equipment malfunction and orders immediate return to base." Alexis felt her heart sink as she realized the implications. Ground radar might not be detecting the stealth aircraft, and Fletcher's reports were being given more credibility than her own observations. But the evidence was right in front of her 4 foreign military aircraft that were now actively maneuvering to escape American airspace after completing what appeared to be an intelligence-gathering mission. The lead intruder suddenly dove toward the deck, using terrain masking to break radar lock while simultaneously jamming radio frequencies. The move was executed with the precision of a combat veteran, confirming that these weren't training pilots but experienced military aviators conducting a planned operation. "Not today," Alexis muttered, rolling her F-22 inverted and pulling into a diving turn that would have stressed most aircraft beyond their design limits. The G-forces built rapidly 4 gigaseconds, 5 gigaseconds, 6 gigaseconds, pressing her into her seat and making her vision tunnel slightly. But her aircraft held together, and she maintained visual contact with the fleeing intruders. At Mach 2.1, she was gaining on them rapidly. The lead aircraft was fast, but her F-22 was faster, and her determination was absolute. These pilots had violated American airspace, conducted unauthorized reconnaissance over sensitive military installations, and were now attempting to escape with whatever intelligence they'd gathered. "Unknown aircraft, this is your final warning." She transmitted on the emergency frequency that all military aircraft were required to monitor. "Reduce speed and land immediately at the nearest American airbase, or you will be fired upon." The response came not in words but in action. The lead aircraft suddenly rolled right and began climbing again, while the other 3 broke formation and scattered in different directions. It was a classic evasion pattern designed to split pursuing forces and allow at least some aircraft to escape, but Alexis had studied these tactics extensively, spending countless hours analyzing combat engagement scenarios that most pilots considered theoretical exercises. She selected the lead aircraft, likely the mission commander carrying the most sensitive intelligence, and began an intercept profile that would bring them into missile range within 60 seconds. Her targeting system achieved lock, the distinctive tone filling her headset as her weapon systems prepared for potential engagement. But something made her hesitate. Shooting down foreign aircraft over American soil would be an act of war, a decision with implications far beyond her authority as a junior officer. Yet allowing them to escape with whatever intelligence they'd gathered could compromise national Security for decades. Control, Iron Eagle 2 has achieved weapons lock on hostile aircraft. Request immediate authorization to engage. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity, though it was probably only 10 seconds. When the response came, it changed everything. Iron Eagle 2, negative on weapons authorization. Colonel Fletcher has declared this a training. Exercise malfunction. Return to base immediately. That is a direct order. Fletcher's voice cut in immediately afterward, his transmission overlapping with the controller's words. Thompson, you are relieved of command. Land immediately or face court-martial for insubordination. Alexis stared at her heads-up display, watching the hostile aircraft continue their escape while ground control ordered her to break off pursuit. The lead intruder was already at the edge of her missile range, and in 30 more seconds would be beyond interception entirely. Everything she'd trained for, everything she believed about her duty as an Air Force officer, came down to this moment. Follow orders from commanders who seemed unable or unwilling to acknowledge the threat, or trust her own judgment and continue the pursuit of what she knew were hostile foreign aircraft. The decision came with crystalline clarity. Her oath was to defend the Constitution and the American people, not to blindly follow orders that would allow enemies to escape with impunity. Control, Iron Eagle 2 continuing pursuit. These aircraft pose an immediate threat to national security. She pushed her throttles to maximum afterburner, the F-22's engines screaming as she accelerated past Mach 2.2 in pursuit of the fleeing intruders. Behind her, Fletcher's voice exploded over the radio with threats and accusations, but she focused solely on the targeting data streaming across her displays. At Mach 2.3, she finally forced the lead aircraft into a position where escape was impossible. Rather than risk being shot down, the foreign pilot suddenly reduced power and began transmitting surrender signals on the emergency frequency. American aircraft, we surrender. Do not fire. We are reducing speed and will comply with landing instructions. Alexis felt a surge of professional satisfaction as she escorted the surrendering aircraft toward Thunderbolt Air Force Base, followed by the other 3 intruders who had also given up their escape attempts once their leader was captured. She had successfully defended American airspace against foreign intrusion, prevented a potential intelligence disaster, and done so without firing a single shot. It would be the last professional victory of her career. The debriefing room at Thunderbolt Air Force Base had never felt so cold. Alexis sat at a metal table, still wearing her flight suit, the adrenaline from the mission slowly fading as the reality of her situation began to crystallize. The 4 foreign aircraft were now secured in heavily guarded hangars, their pilots in military custody, and intelligence analysts were already examining the sophisticated surveillance equipment found aboard their jets. By any objective measure, the mission had been an unprecedented success. She had single-handedly prevented what could have been the most significant intelligence breach in decades, forcing the surrender of foreign operatives who had penetrated deep into American airspace. The captured aircraft contained advanced reconnaissance equipment and data storage devices that would provide invaluable insights into foreign military capabilities. Colonel Fletcher sat across from her, his hands steady now, his earlier confusion and panic replaced by cold calculation. The transformation was remarkable. The same man who had seemed incapacitated during the flight was now composed and articulate, speaking with the authority of someone preparing to control the narrative of what had occurred. "Captain Thompson," he began, his voice carrying formal military precision, "you are aware that you violated direct orders from your commanding officer during today's exercise." The word exercise hit Alexis like a physical blow. "Sir, with respect, that was not an exercise. We intercepted genuine hostile aircraft conducting unauthorized reconnaissance over American territory. The evidence is sitting in our hangars right now." Fletcher's expression didn't change. "What's sitting in our hangars are foreign aircraft that were participating in a classified training exercise designed to test our response protocols. An exercise that you compromised by refusing to follow established command structure. Alexis felt the world tilting beneath her feet. That's impossible, sir. Those aircraft were conducting evasive maneuvers, jamming communications, and attempting to escape American airspace. No training exercise involves actual foreign military assets penetrating our borders without proper notification. Captain, you're obviously confused about the nature of today's mission, Fletcher replied, pulling out a thick folder that appeared to have been prepared well in advance. The classification level was higher than your security clearance allowed. You were briefed only on the portions of the exercise relevant to your participation. The folder contained documents that Alexis had never seen before: training exercise protocols, international cooperation agreements, and flight plans that seemed to justify the presence of foreign aircraft in American airspace. The paperwork looked official, complete with proper military formatting, and what appeared to be authentic signatures from high-ranking officials. But something about the documents felt wrong. The dates were recent, too recent for such a complex international exercise to have been planned and approved through proper channels. The signatures, while appearing authentic at first glance, seemed slightly off when examined closely. Most troubling of all, none of the standard safety protocols for international training exercises had been followed. Sir, if this was a planned exercise, why wasn't I briefed on the full mission parameters? Why did you seem unaware of the aircraft's presence during our flight? Why were no safety corridors established? Fletcher's eyes hardened. Captain, are you questioning my competence as your commanding officer? Are you suggesting that I was somehow unaware of the mission I was personally assigned to oversee? The question was phrased as a trap, and Alexis realized she was walking into it. Military protocol demanded respect for the chain of command, even when junior officers had legitimate concerns about their superiors' decisions. Questioning a colonel's competence, especially one with Fletcher's combat record, was career suicide under normal circumstances. No, sir, I'm not questioning your competence. I'm trying to understand why the mission parameters seem to change during flight, and why standard communication protocols weren't followed. The mission parameters didn't change, Captain. Your understanding of them was incomplete from the beginning, which is precisely why junior officers are expected to follow orders rather than make independent tactical decisions. Major Deanna Cross entered the debriefing room at that moment, her expression tense as she surveyed the scene. She had been monitoring radio communications from the control tower and had heard enough of the exchanges to understand that something significant had occurred. Her presence seemed to make Fletcher slightly uncomfortable, though he maintained his authoritative demeanor. Colonel Fletcher, Diana said carefully, I've reviewed the radio transcripts from today's flight. Captain Thompson's reports were consistent with visual contact with unidentified aircraft. Are you saying those contacts were part of a planned exercise? Fletcher's response was immediate and sharp. Major Cross, the details of today's exercise are classified above your clearance level. Captain Thompson's radio reports were confused and contradictory, likely the result of spatial disorientation during high-G maneuvering. Alexis felt her professional reputation being systematically dismantled by a man who had seemed barely capable of maintaining level flight just hours earlier. The transformation was so complete that she began to question her own memories of the events. Had Fletcher really been incapacitated during the flight, or had she misinterpreted his behavior? Sir, she said quietly, I respectfully request that the aircraft's flight data recorders be examined. They will show exactly what occurred during the mission and verify my account of events. Fletcher's pause was barely perceptible, but Diana noticed it. Unfortunately, Captain, both aircraft experienced technical malfunctions with their recording systems during today's flight. A regrettable coincidence, but not uncommon during high-stress maneuvers at extreme altitudes. The lie was so brazen that Alexis felt momentarily speechless. Flight data recorders were among the most reliable systems on modern military aircraft, designed to function under conditions far more extreme than anything they had encountered during the mission. The probability of both aircraft experiencing simultaneous recorder failures was essentially zero. "Colonel," Diana interjected, "standard protocol requires that any mission involving foreign aircraft be logged with multiple agencies. I don't show any international exercise notifications in today's flight operations." "Major, as I've explained, this was a classified operation. The appropriate agencies were notified through secure channels that don't appear in standard flight." Operations logs. Fletcher was providing plausible explanations for every inconsistency, but the explanations felt rehearsed, as if he had anticipated every question and prepared responses in advance. The speed with which he produced documentation and provided justifications suggested a level of preparation that was inconsistent with the confused, incapacitated officer Alexis had observed during the flight. "Captain Thompson," Fletcher continued, "based on your performance today, I'm recommending that you be grounded pending a full psychological evaluation. Your inability to follow direct orders, combined with apparent hallucinations about hostile aircraft, suggests that you may be experiencing stress-related mental health issues that compromise your fitness for flight duty." The words hit Alexis like a physical assault. In military aviation, questions about mental fitness were career-ending accusations that could never be fully overcome, even if later disproven. Fletcher wasn't just challenging her account of events, he was systematically destroying her credibility and her future. "Sir, I request formal hearings with independent investigators. I want flight data analysis, radar recordings, and testimony from air traffic controllers who monitored today's mission." "Captain, you're in no position to make requests. You're facing potential charges of insubordination, failure to follow lawful orders, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. I suggest you focus on preparing your defense rather than making demands." As Alexis left the debriefing room, she realized that Fletcher had orchestrated something far more sophisticated than a simple cover-up. He had created an alternative narrative that painted her as an unstable pilot who had compromised a legitimate training exercise through insubordination and poor judgment, the man who had been too incapacitated to recognize genuine threats to American security was now systematically destroying the officer who had successfully neutralized those threats. The betrayal was complete, and it was just beginning. The military tribunal convened 3 days later in the formal conference room of Thunderbolt Air Force Base's administrative building. The chamber was designed to intimidate polished mahogany walls lined with portraits of distinguished generals, the American flag standing prominently behind the judge's bench, and an atmosphere of institutional gravity that weighed down every word spoken within its walls. General Robert Stone presided over the 3-member panel, his silver hair and weathered face bearing the marks of someone who had seen combat in multiple theaters and commanded respect through decades of unwavering service. To his left sat Colonel Maria Santos, a former fighter pilot whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for military personnel who failed to meet the highest standards. On his right, Colonel James Wright brought 30 years of military law experience to the proceedings, his analytical mind capable of dissecting the most complex legal arguments. Alexis sat at the defendant's table, wearing her dress blue uniform, every ribbon and decoration properly positioned according to military regulations. The same decorations that had once represented her excellence as an officer now felt like hollow mockery as she faced charges that could end not just her career, but potentially result in criminal prosecution and imprisonment. The charges were devastating in their scope and precision. Article 86. Absence without leave for leaving her assigned position during the flight. Article 90. Willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer for refusing Fletcher's direct orders to return to base. Article 92. Failure to obey order or regulation for violating established protocols during the intercept. Article 134. Conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline for creating what prosecutors claimed was an international incident based on hallucinations. Colonel Fletcher sat at the prosecution table, his testimony folder thick with documentation that supported his version of events. He appeared calm and confident, occasionally making notes as if he were simply observing routine proceedings rather than orchestrating the destruction of a fellow officer's career. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing that of a distinguished officer performing an unpleasant but necessary duty. "The prosecution will demonstrate," announced Major Kevin Walsh, the prosecuting attorney, that Captain Thompson's actions on the date in question represented a complete breakdown of military discipline and judgment. Rather than following the lawful orders of her commanding officer during a classified training exercise, she engaged in reckless and unauthorized pursuit of friendly aircraft, creating the risk of an international incident that could have had catastrophic consequences for American foreign relations. The word "friendly" hit Alexis like a slap. The aircraft she had intercepted were now being characterized as allies participating in a legitimate exercise, not hostile forces conducting unauthorized reconnaissance. The narrative transformation was so complete that she began to question whether her own memories could be trusted. Walsh continued his opening statement with devastating efficiency. "The evidence will show that Captain Thompson exhibited signs of mental instability during the flight, reporting contacts that didn't exist on ground radar, claiming to intercept hostile aircraft that were actually participants in a pre-planned international cooperation exercise, and refusing direct orders from a superior officer with impeccable credentials and extensive combat experience." When Fletcher took the witness stand, his testimony was a masterpiece of military precision and apparent sincerity. He described the mission as a routine training exercise designed to test American response times to simulated intrusions with foreign aircraft provided by allied nations under strict diplomatic protocols. Captain Thompson seemed agitated from the beginning of the flight. Fletcher testified, his voice carrying the authority of rank and experience. "She was making erratic radio calls, reporting contacts that weren't appearing on my radar systems, and becoming increasingly argumentative when I attempted to maintain proper mission discipline." He described Alexis's interception as a dangerous deviation from authorized flight parameters that had compromised months of diplomatic negotiations with allied nations. According to his account, the foreign pilots had been forced to surrender because they believed they were under attack by a rogue American pilot who was not responding to proper identification codes. "Colonel Fletcher," Walsh asked, "in your professional opinion, was Captain Thompson fit for duty during this flight?" "Absolutely not," Fletcher replied without hesitation. "Her behavior was consistent with someone experiencing a psychological episode. Spatial disorientation combined with stress-induced hallucinations. I've seen it before in combat situations, and it's exactly why we have strict protocols for chain of command during flight operations." Alexis watched the panel as Fletcher testified, searching their faces for any sign of skepticism or doubt. General Stone listened with professional attention, but showed no obvious reaction to the testimony. Colonel Santos took detailed notes, occasionally glancing at Alexis with an expression that seemed more curious than sympathetic. Colonel Wright asked pointed questions about technical details, but his inquiries seemed focused on clarifying Fletcher's account rather than challenging it. When Alexis's defense attorney, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, began her cross-examination, she immediately focused on the inconsistencies in Fletcher's account. "Colonel Fletcher, you stated that this was a pre-planned international exercise. Can you provide the exercise designation number and the names of the participating allied nations?" Fletcher's pause was barely perceptible. "That information remains classified at levels above Captain Thompson's clearance." I'm not authorized to discuss those details in open proceedings. Colonel, are you aware that standard protocol requires all international exercises involving American airspace to be coordinated through NORAD and logged with the Federal Aviation Administration? Captain Rodriguez, you're obviously not familiar with the protocols for highly classified operations. Not all exercises follow standard FAA notification procedures. Rodriguez pressed harder. Colonel, you testified that Captain Thompson was reporting contacts that didn't appear on your radar. Is it possible that your radar systems experienced malfunctions during the flight? My aircraft systems were functioning perfectly. Captain Thompson's reports were the result of her mental state, not equipment failures. Then how do you explain the fact that 4 foreign military aircraft are currently secured in hangars on this base? Fletcher's response was immediate and practiced. Those aircraft landed here as part of the planned exercise termination. Their presence validates my account of events, not Captain Thompson's claims about hostile intrusions. The questioning continued for 2 hours, with Rodriguez systematically challenging every aspect of Fletcher's testimony. But for every inconsistency she identified, Fletcher provided plausible explanations that maintained the coherence of his narrative. His answers suggested either a remarkably sophisticated cover-up or the legitimate confusion of an officer trying to understand why her subordinate had compromised a sensitive operation. When Alexis finally took the stand in her own defense, her testimony felt inadequate compared to Fletcher's authoritative presentation. She described the same events from her perspective: Fletcher's apparent incapacitation, the hostile aircraft's evasive maneuvers, the successful interception of genuine threats to American security. But without supporting evidence, her words sounded like the desperate claims of someone trying to justify inexcusable insubordination. Captain Thompson, General Stone asked during her testimony, are you suggesting that Colonel Fletcher, an officer with 15 years of distinguished service including combat deployments, was somehow incapacitated during a routine training flight? The question was phrased to make her sound paranoid and disrespectful. Sir, I'm reporting what I observed during the flight. Colonel Fletcher seemed disoriented and unable to respond appropriately to the tactical situation. And you felt qualified to make that assessment about a superior officer's fitness for duty? Sir, I felt obligated to respond to what I identified as genuine threats to American airspace. Threats that existed only in your perception, according to all other evidence presented to this tribunal. Alexis realized that the fix was already in. The tribunal wasn't interested in determining what had actually happened during the flight. They were conducting a formal proceeding to validate a predetermined conclusion. Fletcher's narrative had been accepted as truth, and her role was simply to provide the appearance of due process before receiving her punishment. The verdict, when it came the following morning, surprised no one who had observed the proceedings. Guilty on all charges, with a recommendation for immediate discharge from military service and forfeiture of all benefits earned during her years of service. As General Stone read the sentence, Alexis felt her dreams of flying dissolving like morning mist. The sky that had once called to her would remain forever beyond her reach, not because she lacked the skill to soar, but because she had possessed too much integrity to remain silent when her country was under attack. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The reassignment letter arrived in a manila envelope slipped under Alexis's door at 0500 hours, 3 days after the tribunal's verdict. The official military letterhead seemed to mock her as she read the terse language that would define the next chapter of her life. Due to recent disciplinary action, Captain Thompson was being transferred to the Cyber Operations Division at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado. Effective immediately, Cyber Operations. She had gone from flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world to monitoring computer screens in a windowless basement facility. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman deemed unfit to defend American airspace would now be responsible for defending American cyberspace. An equally critical mission that required the same vigilance and quick decision-making that had gotten her into trouble. Peterson Space Force Base sprawled across the Colorado plains like a technological fortress, its antenna farms and satellite dishes reaching toward the same sky that Alexis was no longer allowed to inhabit. The Cyber Operations Division occupied a series of nondescript buildings that could have been mistaken for corporate offices if not for the heavy security and the constant hum of cooling systems supporting thousands of computer servers. Her new supervisor, Major Sarah Bennett, was a career intelligence officer who had never flown anything more complex than a transport helicopter. Bennett reviewed Alexis's file with the clinical detachment of someone processing routine personnel transfers, showing no recognition of the exceptional pilot who had once been considered among the Air Force's most promising officers. Your security clearance has been reduced pending review, Bennett informed her during their first meeting, but you'll still have access to classified systems. Your primary responsibility will be monitoring network traffic for anomalous patterns that might indicate foreign intrusion attempts. Anomalous patterns. Foreign intrusions. The words carried bitter irony for someone who had been court-martialed for detecting and intercepting actual foreign intrusions into American territory. Now she would search for digital threats on computer screens, instead of intercepting physical threats in the sky. The workspace assigned to Alexis was a cubicle in a room filled with dozens of similar workstations, each occupied by technicians who spent their days staring at streams of data flowing across multiple monitors. The constant clicking of keyboards and the low murmur of technical conversations created a background noise that felt oppressive after years of experiencing the profound silence of high-altitude flight. Her colleagues were professional but distant, aware of her background through military gossip networks that spread information faster than official channels. They knew she had been a pilot, and they knew she had been transferred to cyber operations under circumstances that weren't entirely clear. The combination created an atmosphere of polite curiosity mixed with careful avoidance of topics that might prove uncomfortable. You're the fighter pilot, right? Asked Sergeant David Kim during her first week, his voice carrying the mixture of respect and puzzlement that seemed to characterize how everyone viewed her situation. Must be quite an adjustment, going from Mach 2 to monitoring code. Every mission serves the country, Alexis replied, the standard response she had developed for such inquiries. It was easier than explaining how she had been systematically destroyed for doing her job too well. The technical training required for cyber operations was extensive, involving complex software systems, network protocols, and threat analysis, methodologies that bore no resemblance to anything she had learned during flight training. But Alexis approached the new material with the same obsessive attention to detail that had made her an exceptional pilot, staying late each evening to master systems and procedures that most technicians learned gradually over months. Her supervisors began to notice that her threat detection rates were significantly higher than average, and her analysis reports were more thorough and accurate than those produced by technicians with years more experience. She had an intuitive understanding of how adversaries might think and operate, perhaps developed through her experience with aerial combat tactics. Thompson's got a good eye for patterns, Major Bennett noted during a staff meeting that Alexis wasn't invited to attend. Her detection rate is 3 times the division average, and she's only been here 6 months. What Bennett didn't know was that Alexis wasn't just detecting random threats. She was systematically mapping the entire network architecture of America's military cyber infrastructure, learning every system, every protocol, every vulnerability that might be exploited by foreign adversaries. The knowledge was accumulating in her mind like pieces of a vast puzzle, creating a comprehensive understanding of digital warfare capabilities that few people possessed. During lunch breaks, she would drive to nearby airfields and watch civilian Aircraft practicing touch-and-go landings, their simple maneuvers a painful reminder of the complex aerobatics she had once performed at supersonic speeds. The sound of jet engines would make her chest tighten with longing, but she forced herself to watch anyway, maintaining her connection to the world of aviation, even if she could no longer participate in it. Evenings were the hardest, alone, in her small apartment off base, surrounded by technical manuals and computer equipment. She would sometimes find herself staring at photographs from her flying days. Pictures of her standing beside her F-22, images of formation flights over spectacular landscapes, group photos with squadron mates who had moved on to airline careers while she remained trapped in digital exile. Major Diana Cross called occasionally, their conversations carefully neutral as they discussed general topics while avoiding the events that had led to Alexis's downfall. Diana had been promoted and transferred to a different base, her career continuing its upward trajectory while Alexis remained frozen in professional purgatory. "How are you adapting to the new assignment?" Diana would ask, her voice carrying concern that couldn't be directly expressed over potentially monitored phone lines. "Learning a lot," Alexis would reply. "Different kind of flying, but the mission is still important." They both understood the subtext. Diana knew that Alexis was being wasted in cyber operations, and Alexis knew that Diana couldn't risk her own career by openly supporting someone who had been branded as unstable and insubordinate. 2 years into her exile, Alexis had become the most knowledgeable cyber operations specialist at Peterson Space Force Base, with an understanding of network security that impressed even senior officers who had spent their entire careers in intelligence fields. Her reports were regularly forwarded to Pentagon officials, and her threat assessments were influencing national security policies. But late at night, when the Cyber Operations Center was nearly empty and she was alone with glowing computer screens, Alexis would sometimes close her eyes and remember what it felt like to break the sound barrier at 40,000 feet. The memory of that freedom, that moment of perfect unity between pilot and machine, sustained her through the monotony of digital surveillance. She had no way of knowing that her cyber expertise was about to become the key to unlocking the truth about Colonel Fletcher's corruption, or that the same technical skills that kept her grounded would soon give her the tools to expose the conspiracy that had destroyed her flying career. The ghost in the machine was about to become very dangerous. Indeed, the alert appeared on Alexis's monitoring station at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, when the Cyber Operations Center was nearly empty, except for the skeleton crew maintaining 24-hour surveillance of America's digital infrastructure. Most of her colleagues had gone home hours earlier, leaving her alone with the constant hum of server farms and the soft glow of multiple computer screens, displaying real-time network traffic from military installations across the globe. The anomaly was subtle, a pattern of data requests that appeared routine on the surface but contained irregularities that triggered her analytical instincts. Someone was accessing classified flight training databases at Thunderbolt Air Force Base, pulling historical records and mission reports, using credentials that appeared legitimate but showed access patterns inconsistent with normal administrative functions. Under normal circumstances, such queries would be logged and forgotten, filed away as routine database maintenance or authorized research. But Alexis had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect digital behavior that didn't quite fit established patterns, a skill that had made her one of the most effective threat analysts in the division. She began tracing the access logs, following digital breadcrumbs through layers of network security that would have challenged technicians with decades more experience. What she found made her pulse quicken with a familiar sense of recognition. The queries were systematically targeting records related to training incidents, particularly those involving allegations of instructor misconduct or equipment failures. Search parameters were specific enough to suggest insider knowledge of the military's filing systems, but broad enough to capture large volumes of potentially compromising information. Someone was conducting a fishing expedition through sensitive personnel records, looking for patterns or incidents that could be exploited for unknown purposes. As she dug deeper into the network logs, Alexis discovered that the unauthorized access had been occurring regularly for over 18 months, always during off-peak hours when oversight was minimal. The sophistication of the intrusion suggested either a highly skilled external adversary or someone with legitimate access credentials who was exceeding their authorized privileges. Her training had taught her to report such anomalies immediately to her supervisors, following established protocols for potential security breaches. But something about this particular intrusion felt personal, connected to her own experiences in ways that made her want to understand the full scope before involving others who might not appreciate the implications. She spent the next week conducting what she privately called deep reconnaissance into the unauthorized database access, using her growing expertise in network forensics to map the digital footprints left by the intruder. The pattern that emerged was both sophisticated and familiar. Someone was systematically examining records of training incidents that had resulted in disciplinary action against student pilots, particularly cases involving allegations of instructor negligence or misconduct. The breakthrough came when she traced one of the access sessions back to its originating terminal. The digital signature matched a workstation assigned to the Flight Training Command at Thunderbolt Air Force Base, specifically to an office used by senior instructors for administrative duties. The access credentials belonged to Colonel Raymond Fletcher. Alexis stared at the data on her screen, her heart hammering as the implications crystallized in her mind. Fletcher wasn't just accessing routine administrative records. He was conducting systematic surveillance of disciplinary cases, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities that could be exploited to protect himself or eliminate threats to his position. She expanded her search parameters, looking for any other unusual activity associated with Fletcher's credentials. What she found was a digital empire of manipulation and control that had been operating for years under the cover of legitimate administrative access. Fletcher had been monitoring the personnel records of dozens of pilots, tracking their performance, evaluations, disciplinary histories, and personal information that could be used for leverage or intimidation. He had accessed psychological evaluation reports, financial records, and even family information that was stored in military databases for emergency contact purposes. Most disturbing of all, she found evidence that Fletcher had been modifying training records, making subtle alterations to incident reports and performance evaluations that would be difficult to detect without detailed analysis. Student pilots who had reported safety concerns or instructor misconduct found their records mysteriously updated with negative performance markers that could damage their career prospects. The digital trail painted a picture of systematic corruption that extended far beyond the incident that had destroyed Alexis's career. Fletcher had been using his position and access privileges to silence critics, protect allies, and eliminate anyone who threatened his carefully constructed facade of competence and integrity. Among the modified records, she found her own file, or rather, the version that had been presented to the tribunal. The original incident report had been systematically altered, with key details removed and new information added that supported Fletcher's narrative of a training exercise gone wrong due to pilot error and insubordination. But Fletcher had made a critical mistake in his digital manipulation. The network systems at military installations maintained automatic backup logs that captured all database modifications, including the original versions of altered documents. These backup systems were designed to prevent data loss due to equipment failures, but they also created an indelible record of any unauthorized changes to official records. Alexis spent 3 consecutive nights extracting and analyzing these backup files, building a comprehensive case file that documented Fletcher's pattern of corruption over a period of more than 5 years. The evidence was overwhelming: dozens of modified records, unauthorized access to classified information, and systematic manipulation of military personnel data for personal gain. The most damning evidence related to her own case. The backup logs contain the original, unaltered version of Fletcher's incident report from their training flight, a document that painted a completely different picture of what had occurred that day. According to the original report, Fletcher had noted equipment malfunction and pilot disorientation during the flight, along with successful emergency intervention by wingmen and recommendation for commendation. The report had been filed within hours of their landing, before Fletcher had time to construct his alternative narrative. Subsequent versions of the same report showed systematic modifications over several days, with Fletcher gradually transforming his account from one that praised Alexis's emergency response to one that condemned her for insubordination and poor judgment. The digital timestamps proved that the final version, the one presented to the tribunal, bore no resemblance to Fletcher's initial, honest assessment of events. But even more significant was what she found in Fletcher's personal correspondence. Files, messages that had been carelessly stored on military servers, despite their sensitive nature. Email exchanges with unknown contacts discussed managing the Thompson situation and ensuring institutional stability in language that suggested coordination with outside parties. One message, sent 3 days before the tribunal, contained the phrase, "The pilot has been neutralized. Her credibility is destroyed, and she poses no further threat to the operation." The language was military but impersonal, discussing Alexis as if she were an enemy combatant rather than a fellow officer. As Alexis compiled her evidence, she realized she was looking at something far larger than a single corrupt officer protecting his career. Fletcher appeared to be part of a network that viewed independent thinking pilots as threats to be eliminated, rather than assets to be valued. Her case wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a systematic campaign to remove officers who couldn't be controlled. The question now was what to do with information that could vindicate her but might also expose her to charges of unauthorized access to classified systems. She had obtained the evidence through methods that exceeded her authorized privileges, using cyber warfare techniques against her own military's network infrastructure. But as she looked at the overwhelming proof of Fletcher's corruption, Alexis realized she had no choice. The same integrity that had compelled her to intercept foreign aircraft over American soil now demanded that she expose the conspiracy that had destroyed her career and threatened countless other officers. The ghost in the machine was about to become a whistleblower, and Colonel Fletcher's carefully constructed empire of deception was about to collapse under the weight of digital truth. The emergency alert pierced through the quiet hum of the Peterson Space Force Base Cyber Operations Center at 14:23 hours on a Friday afternoon that had been progressing like any other. Alexis was deep in analysis of Fletcher's corrupted files, when every monitor in the facility suddenly flashed red with a priority 1 security warning that sent technicians scrambling to their stations. Multiple bogies, fast-moving, approaching restricted airspace over Cheyenne Mountain, announced Major Bennett over the facility's intercom system. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Cheyenne Mountain housed NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, making it one of the most sensitive and heavily protected military installations in the United States. Any unauthorized aircraft approaching the facility represented a potential threat to national security that could trigger international incidents or worse. Alexis's workstation immediately began receiving real-time data feeds from multiple radar installations, satellite surveillance systems, and airborne early warning aircraft. The picture that emerged on her screens made her blood run cold with a sense of terrible familiarity. 4 aircraft, flying in tight formation, approaching from the southwest at high speed and extreme altitude. Their electronic signatures were being partially masked by advanced stealth technology, but the flight pattern and approach vector were almost identical to the incident that had destroyed her career 3 years earlier. "Control, this is NORAD Command," crackled the voice of General Patricia Hayes over the emergency communication network. "We need immediate threat assessment on the approaching aircraft. Are they displaying IFF codes? Identification friend or foe systems were designed to prevent exactly this type of confusion, automatically identifying aircraft as friendly or hostile based on encrypted transponder signals. But Alexis could see from her monitoring station that the approaching aircraft were either not equipped with compatible IFF systems or were deliberately masking their identification. "Negative on IFF General," reported the radar operator. "Aircraft are maintaining radio silence and have not responded to repeated identification requests." Alexis watched the tactical display as American interceptor aircraft scrambled from 3 different bases, their F-22 Raptors climbing rapidly to meet the unknown threat. But something about the approaching aircraft's flight characteristics bothered her. Their speed, altitude, and maneuvering patterns suggested capabilities that exceeded most known foreign military aircraft. Major Bennett appeared at Alexis's workstation, her face tense with the gravity of the situation. "Thompson, you've got the best threat analysis record in the division. What are you seeing?" Alexis studied the data streams flowing across her multiple monitors, her mind automatically processing speed, altitude, heading, and electronic signature. Information with the same intuitive understanding that had once made her an exceptional pilot. But something was wrong with the tactical picture, inconsistencies that suggested the situation wasn't what it appeared to be. "Ma'am, the aircraft are maintaining perfect formation discipline despite evasive maneuvers," she reported. "Their electronic countermeasures are sophisticated, but following patterns consistent with training exercises rather than hostile penetration. Are you suggesting these aren't genuine threats?" Alexis hesitated, remembering how similar analysis 3 years earlier had resulted in her career destruction. But the data was clear, and the lives of American pilots were potentially at stake. "Ma'am, I'm seeing communication patterns between the aircraft that suggest coordination with ground-based controllers. Hostile aircraft conducting unauthorized reconnaissance wouldn't be maintaining such obvious contact with command elements." On the main tactical display, the American interceptors were closing rapidly with the unknown aircraft. F-22 pilots were reporting weapon system locks and requesting authorization to engage if the intruders didn't immediately change course and land at designated airfields. "General Hayes," came the voice of the lead interceptor pilot, "I have visual contact with the bogies. They appear to be—" "Wait, what the hell?" The transmission was followed by several seconds of confused radio chatter as the interceptor pilots tried to process what they were seeing. The unknown aircraft weren't attempting to evade or escape. They were executing a precise formation maneuver that brought them into standard diplomatic escort positions. "Control, this is Eagle 1, reported the lead pilot. The unknown aircraft are displaying ... They're showing diplomatic immunity markings. This appears to be some kind of official delegation." Alexis felt her heart sink as she realized what was happening. The same scenario that had destroyed her career was being repeated, but this time with different players and potentially different outcomes. Someone was using foreign aircraft in American airspace to test response protocols, create confusion, or worse, to identify and eliminate military personnel who might ask inconvenient questions. Her workstation began receiving classified communication intercepts that painted a clearer picture of the situation. The approaching aircraft were indeed foreign military jets, but they were operating under diplomatic cover as part of what appeared to be a legitimate international cooperation exercise. But as Alexis analyzed the communication patterns and flight data, she noticed the same inconsistencies that had troubled her 3 years earlier. The exercise protocols weren't being followed properly, safety corridors hadn't been established, and the foreign aircraft were gathering intelligence about American defensive capabilities while hiding behind diplomatic immunity. Major Bennett, she said quietly, we need to review the exercise authorization codes. Something isn't right about this operation. Bennett was coordinating with multiple agencies and barely had time to acknowledge Alexis's concern. Thompson, we're in the middle of a potential international incident. Focus on your threat analysis. But Alexis was already deep into the classified exercise database, using her cyber warfare skills to trace the authorization codes back to their source. What she found made her realize that history was about to repeat itself with potentially catastrophic consequences. The exercise had been authorized through the same channels that Fletcher had used to justify the incident that destroyed her career. The diplomatic paperwork was legitimate, but backdated. The foreign aircraft were operating undercover protocols that exceeded their actual authorization, and the entire operation bore the digital fingerprints of the same corruption network she had been investigating. Ma'am, she said urgently, this exercise isn't what it appears to be. The authorization codes have been manipulated, and the foreign aircraft are conducting unauthorized intelligence gathering under diplomatic cover. Bennett turned to face her with an expression of barely controlled frustration. Captain Thompson, are you seriously suggesting that we're dealing with another one of your conspiracy theories? Haven't you learned anything from your previous experience? The words hit Alexis like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain focused on the data streaming across her screens. American interceptor pilots were being maneuvered into positions where their defensive capabilities could be studied and analyzed by foreign intelligence services, all under the cover of a diplomatic exercise that had been corrupted from within. Ma'am, I can prove that this exercise has been compromised. The same network that manipulated training records has been used to authorize this operation. Bennett stared at her for a long moment, clearly torn between dismissing another Thompson conspiracy theory and acknowledging that the base's most skilled threat analyst might be identifying a genuine security breach. On the tactical display, the foreign aircraft were now being escorted to landing at a secure military airfield, their intelligence gathering mission apparently complete. But Alexis knew that the real operation was just beginning. Someone would soon be looking for scapegoats to blame for any security compromises that had occurred during the exercise. She made a decision that would either vindicate her 3 years of exile or destroy what remained of her military career. Opening a secure communication channel, she began transmitting the evidence she had compiled about Fletcher's corruption network directly to the Pentagon's Inspector General office. Ghost in the Machine was about to speak truth to power, regardless of the personal consequences. The response to Alexis's transmission came faster than she had expected. Within 18 hours of sending her evidence package to the Pentagon's Inspector General office, a team of investigators arrived at Peterson Space Force Base with credentials that commanded immediate cooperation from every officer on the installation, regardless of rank or security clearance. Major Sarah Walsh led the investigation team, her reputation for thoroughness and integrity preceding her arrival. She had built her career on exposing corruption within military ranks, and her presence at Peterson meant that someone in Washington was taking Alexis's allegations seriously enough to authorize a full-scale investigation. Captain Thompson, Walsh said during their first meeting in a secure conference room that had been hastily cleared for classified discussions, the evidence you've provided suggests a pattern of corruption that could compromise national security at the highest levels. We need to understand exactly how you obtained this information and verify its authenticity. Alexis had prepared for this moment during the sleepless hours following her decision to become a whistleblower. She understood that her methods of obtaining evidence had exceeded her authorized access privileges, potentially making her liable for prosecution under the same laws designed to protect classified information. Ma'am, I use network forensics, techniques learned during my cyber operations training to trace unauthorized database access that I discovered during routine monitoring duties," she replied carefully. "The evidence I compiled documents systematic manipulation of military personnel records over a period of several years." Walsh reviewed the digital evidence package on a secure tablet computer, her expression growing increasingly grave as she examined the scope of Fletcher's corruption network. The backup database logs, modified personnel records, and intercepted communications painted a picture of systematic abuse that extended far beyond a single incident at Thunderbolt Air Force Base. "This suggests that Colonel Fletcher wasn't acting alone," Walsh observed, highlighting several email exchanges that referenced coordination with unnamed parties. "Do you have any information about other individuals who might be involved in this network?" Alexis had been wondering about the same question during her investigation. The sophistication of Fletcher's operation and the institutional protection he had received suggested a conspiracy that included multiple participants at various levels of the military hierarchy. "Ma'am, the communication pattern suggests coordination with at least 3 other individuals, based on linguistic analysis and operational timing. The emails reference institutional stability and managing problematic personnel in ways that suggest systematic targeting of independent thinking officers." Walsh's investigation team immediately began expanding their inquiry, requesting personnel records and communication logs from multiple military installations. What they discovered validated Alexis's analysis and revealed a corruption network that had been operating for nearly a decade. The pattern was consistent across different bases and units. Exceptional pilots who demonstrated independent thinking or questioned authority were systematically targeted for elimination through false accusations, manipulated evidence, and coordinated character assassination. The network protected incompetent or corrupt officers while destroying talented personnel who might threaten their positions. "We've identified 17 cases similar to yours," Walsh informed Alexis during a briefing session 3 days into the investigation. "Pilots who reported safety violations, questioned training protocols, or demonstrated exceptional performance that threatened established hierarchies. All were subjected to disciplinary action based on manipulated evidence." The 17 cases represented careers destroyed, lives ruined, and military capabilities deliberately degraded to protect a network of corrupt officers who valued personal security over national defense. Each case followed the same pattern: exceptional performance followed by a single incident that resulted in career destruction based on testimony from protected witnesses. But Walsh's team had also uncovered evidence that went beyond personnel manipulation. Fletcher's network had been systematically compromising operational security by allowing foreign intelligence services to gather information during fake exercises designed to look legitimate, while providing adversaries with detailed intelligence about American defensive capabilities. "The exercise that occurred during your alert last week," Walsh explained, "was the 4th such operation in the past 18 months. Each time, foreign aircraft operating under diplomatic cover were allowed to probe American air defenses and gather intelligence about response times, communication protocols, and interceptor capabilities." Alexis felt a mixture of vindication and horror as she realized the scope of what had been occurring. Her original interception of foreign aircraft hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been part of a pattern of systematic intelligence gathering that was being facilitated by corrupt American officers. "Ma'am, are you saying that Fletcher and his network were deliberately allowing foreign intelligence services to compromise American security?" "That's exactly what the evidence suggests," Walsh replied grimly. "And your case wasn't just about destroying an inconvenient officer. It was about eliminating someone who had demonstrated the capability to detect and counter their operations." The investigation expanded rapidly as more evidence surfaced. Financial records showed suspicious payments to network members through complex routing systems designed to obscure their origins. Communication intercepts revealed coordination with foreign intelligence contacts who were providing both funding and operational guidance to the corruption network. Most damaging of all was the discovery of Fletcher's personal communications with foreign handlers, messages that discussed American pilots as assets to be managed and threats to be neutralized. The language was clinical and businesslike, discussing the destruction of American military personnel as if they were discussing inventory management. "General Hayes wants to meet with you personally," Walsh informed Alexis after a week of intensive investigation. "She's been briefed on the full scope of what we've discovered, and she has questions that only you can answer." General Patricia Hayes commanded NORAD, making her one of the most powerful military officers in the United States. Her reputation for integrity and competence was matched only by her intolerance for corruption within military ranks. When she requested a personal meeting with a junior officer, it meant that the investigation had reached the highest levels of military leadership. The meeting took place in a secure facility deep within Cheyenne Mountain, surrounded by the same defensive systems that Fletcher's network had been systematically compromising. General Hayes studied Alexis with the penetrating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating personnel under extreme pressure. "Captain Thompson," Hayes began, "your analysis of the recent exercise prevented what could have been a significant intelligence compromise. But I need to understand something. Why didn't you trust institutional channels 3 years ago when you first encountered this corruption?" The question was fair but painful. Alexis had tried to work within the system, only to discover that the system itself had been compromised by the network she was trying to expose. "Ma'am, I did trust institutional channels initially. But when the tribunal ignored evidence and accepted obviously manipulated testimony, I realized that the corruption extended beyond Colonel Fletcher himself." Hayes nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with the answer. "Your cyber operations skills have provided us with evidence that could never have been obtained through conventional investigation methods. But I need to know, are you prepared to testify about everything you've discovered, regardless of personal consequences?" Alexis understood the implications. Testifying would mean admitting to using unauthorized access methods that could result in criminal prosecution. But it would also mean finally exposing the truth about a conspiracy that had destroyed countless careers and compromised national security. "Yes, ma'am, I'm prepared to testify." General Hayes smiled for the first time during their meeting. "Good, because tomorrow we're arresting Colonel Fletcher and 17 other members of his network. And you're going to help us make sure that every charge sticks." The ghost in the machine was about to become the star witness in the most significant military corruption case in decades. The arrests began at dawn on a Tuesday morning, coordinated across 7 different military installations in an operation that had been planned with the precision of a combat mission. Colonel Raymond Fletcher was taken into custody at his quarters on Thunderbolt Air Force Base by military police officers carrying warrants signed by the highest levels of military justice. Command. Alexis watched the operation unfold from the Secure Operations Center at Peterson Space Force Base, where live feeds from multiple installations showed simultaneous arrests of network members who had believed themselves untouchable due to their positions within the military hierarchy. Each arrest represented years of corruption finally being exposed and punished. "Target 7 is secure," reported the military police commander overseeing Fletcher's arrest. "Subject offered no resistance and is being transported to detention facility for processing." Fletcher's calm surrender surprised no one who understood the mentality of career military officers. Even facing overwhelming evidence of treason and corruption, he maintained the disciplined bearing that had protected him throughout his criminal career. But his composed exterior couldn't hide the reality that his carefully constructed empire was collapsing with devastating finality. The evidence against Fletcher and his network was overwhelming. Financial records showed payments totaling more then $2 million from foreign intelligence services over a 5-year period. Communication intercepts documented systematic coordination with enemy agents to compromise American defensive capabilities. Personnel files revealed the deliberate destruction of 17 military careers to protect the network's operations. Major Walsh presented the evidence to a joint military-civilian tribunal that had been hastily convened to handle the most serious espionage case in recent military history. The scope of the conspiracy and the level of national security compromise required the highest levels of judicial review and the most severe legal consequences. The evidence demonstrates a systematic betrayal of oath and country, Walsh testified. Before the tribunal, Colonel Fletcher and his co-conspirators sold American military secrets to foreign adversaries while simultaneously destroying the careers of loyal officers who threatened to expose their operations. But the most powerful testimony came from Alexis herself, who took the witness stand to describe not just her own persecution, but the pattern of corruption that had been hidden beneath Fletcher's facade of military competence. Her cyber operations expertise allowed her to explain the technical details of how the network had operated, providing insight that no other witness could offer. Colonel Fletcher used his administrative access to modify personnel records, creating false narratives that supported his version of events while destroying evidence that contradicted his testimony. She explained to the tribunal, "The original incident report from our training flight praised my emergency response and recommended me for commendation. That report was systematically altered over several days to support charges of insubordination and poor judgment." The tribunal examined the digital evidence on secure displays, watching as backup logs revealed the step-by-step modification of official military documents. The timestamps and digital signatures provided irrefutable proof that Fletcher had committed perjury during Alexis's original court-martial while systematically destroying evidence of his own misconduct. General Patricia Hayes testified about the broader national security implications of the network's activities. These individuals compromised American defensive capabilities for personal financial gain, she told the tribunal. Their fake exercises allowed foreign intelligence services to map our response protocols, communication systems, and interceptor capabilities. The damage to national security will require years to fully assess and repair. The tribunal's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Fletcher was found guilty of treason, espionage, conspiracy, perjury, and violations of his oath of office. His 17 co-conspirators received similar convictions, with sentences ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment, depending on their level of involvement in the conspiracy. But the most significant moment came when the tribunal addressed Alexis's original court-martial conviction. General Hayes personally delivered the tribunal's decision to overturn all charges against her, along with a formal apology from the highest levels of military command. Captain Thompson's actions during the original incident were not only justified, but exemplary, Hayes announced. She prevented a significant intelligence compromise while maintaining the highest standards of military professionalism. Her subsequent persecution represents one of the most serious miscarriages of justice in military history. The tribunal offered Alexis immediate reinstatement to flight status with full restoration of rank and benefits, along with back pay for the 3 years she had spent in cyber operations exile. Multiple commands competed to recruit her, recognizing that her unique combination of flight expertise and cyber warfare capabilities made her invaluable for modern military operations. But Alexis surprised everyone with her response to the tribunal's offer. Instead of immediately returning to the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, she requested assignment to a new position that would combine her flying skills with her cyber operations expertise. The threats facing our country now operate in both physical and digital domains, she explained to General Hayes during a private meeting. My experience in both areas could be valuable for developing new defensive strategies that address hybrid Warfare tactics. Hayes approved the unprecedented assignment, creating a new position that would allow Alexis to work at the intersection of aerial combat and cyber warfare. Her official title became Director of Hybrid Threat Analysis, with authority to investigate any situation where digital and physical security threats might intersect. The media attention surrounding the Fletcher case was intense but carefully managed to protect ongoing intelligence operations. The public learned that a significant espionage network had been exposed and dismantled, but the specific details of how foreign adversaries had compromised American defenses remained classified. Alexis gave only one interview to a military publication that focused on lessons learned rather than personal vindication. "The most important thing isn't that I was proven right," she told the interviewer. "The most important thing is that we identified and stopped a serious threat to national security. That's what military service is about, protecting the country, not protecting individual careers." Deanna Cross, now a colonel herself, attended the formal ceremony where Alexis received the Distinguished Service Medal for her role in exposing the conspiracy. "You never stopped serving," Diana told her friend during the reception. "Even when they tried to destroy you, you kept protecting the country." The ceremony took place in the same hangar where Alexis's F-22 had been maintained during her flying days. The aircraft sat nearby, freshly serviced and ready for her return to flight status whenever she chose to claim her restored wings. But as she stood before her fellow officers, receiving recognition for 3 years of exile and persecution that had ultimately led to one of the most significant counterintelligence victories in military history, Alexis realized that her greatest accomplishment wasn't surviving the conspiracy, it was proving that truth, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually surface. The black box of justice had finally been recovered, and its testimony was impossible to ignore. 6 months after Fletcher's conviction, Alexis stood in a classroom at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, addressing a group of cadet pilots who represented the next generation of military aviators. Her lecture series, Integrity Under Fire, Leadership in Complex Threat Environments, had become one of the most requested courses in the Academy's curriculum. "The most dangerous enemy you'll face in your careers," she told the attentive cadets, "won't be foreign adversaries or technical failures. It will be the temptation to remain silent when you witness wrongdoing, or to follow orders that conflict with your oath to defend the Constitution." The cadets listened with the intensity of young officers who understood that they were receiving wisdom, earned through genuine sacrifice and ultimate vindication. Among them sat Lieutenant Jennifer Martinez, whose own experiences with discriminatory treatment had been resolved through new protocols established after the Fletcher investigation. "Ma'am," Martinez asked during the question period, "how do you maintain confidence in your judgment when institutional authority is telling you that you're wrong?" The question struck at the heart of Alexis's experience, touching on the lonely months when she had been branded as unstable and insubordinate, while possessing evidence that couldn't be shared without compromising her own position. "Trust your training, verify your facts, and document everything," Alexis replied. "But most importantly, remember that your oath is to the Constitution and the American people, not to any individual officer or institutional preference. When those loyalties conflict, your choice should be clear." The new protocols she had helped develop were already transforming military culture across all branches of service. The Thompson protocols created protected channels for reporting suspected corruption, mandatory review procedures for disciplinary actions involving exceptional performers, and digital forensics capabilities that made document manipulation virtually impossible. Her hybrid threat analysis unit had become a model for addressing the complex security challenges of modern warfare, where adversaries used combinations of cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and conventional military pressure to achieve strategic objectives. The unit's success had led to similar organizations being established at military commands worldwide. The Fletcher network wasn't just stealing secrets, she explained to a gathering of senior officers during a Pentagon briefing. They were systematically degrading our human capital by eliminating independent thinkers and protecting incompetent officers. The damage to our military effectiveness was arguably more significant than any classified information they sold. The 17 officers destroyed by Fletcher's network had all been offered reinstatement and compensation, but several had chosen to pursue civilian careers rather than return to military service. Their lost contributions to national defense represented incalculable damage that extended far beyond individual careers. Major Diana Cross, now serving as Deputy Director of Personnel for Air Combat Command, had implemented sweeping reforms to prevent future corruption networks from taking root within military hierarchies. Alexis's case taught us that our greatest threats often come from within, Diana explained during a conference on military justice reform. We had to fundamentally change how we evaluate and protect personnel who demonstrate exceptional integrity. The international implications of the Fletcher case had been profound. Foreign intelligence services had lost years of careful investment in their American assets, while diplomatic relationships were strained by revelations about systematic penetration of sensitive military exercises. Several countries had been forced to recall intelligence personnel and restructure their operations, targeting American military installations, but perhaps the most significant legacy was the cultural transformation. Within military ranks, young officers now understood that independent thinking and moral courage were valued over blind obedience to authority, while senior leaders recognized that protecting institutional reputation at the expense of truth ultimately weakened rather than strengthened military effectiveness. The Thompson case became a watershed moment, observed retired General Robert Chun during a military history symposium. It forced us to confront the reality that our personnel evaluation systems were being manipulated by the very people we trusted to maintain them. The reforms that followed have made our military stronger and more resilient. Alexis had declined numerous offers to write books about her experience or participate in documentary films about the Fletcher conspiracy. Instead, she focused her energy on training the next generation of military leaders and developing new approaches to hybrid threat analysis that would protect American interests in an increasingly complex global environment. Her office at Peterson Space Force Base displayed only two personal items: a photograph of her standing beside her F-22 Raptor during her original pilot training, and a framed copy of the constitutional oath that every military officer swears upon commissioning. Juxtaposition reminded visitors that technical expertise without moral foundation was meaningless. People sometimes ask me if I regret the 3 years I spent in exile, she told a group of military prosecutors during a seminar on evidence preservation. But those years taught me skills that I never would have developed otherwise. The cyber operations expertise that exposed Fletcher's network came directly from that experience. Sometimes what appears to be punishment is actually preparation. The Fletcher case had also led to broader reforms in how classified information was stored and protected. New blockchain-based systems made document modification virtually impossible while maintaining detailed audit trails that could detect unauthorized access within minutes rather than years. Foreign intelligence services found their traditional methods of corrupting American military personnel increasingly ineffective as digital monitoring systems flagged unusual behavior patterns and financial anomalies that might indicate compromise. The network approach that had served Fletcher for nearly a decade became a liability in the new security environment. We've created a system where integrity is protected by technology, explained Colonel Sarah Kim, who directed the new Personnel Security Monitoring Division. Officers like Alexis don't have to risk their careers to expose corruption anymore because our systems detect and investigate suspicious patterns automatically. Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thompson, she had been promoted twice in recognition of her service, often worked late into the evening, analyzing intelligence reports and communication intercepts for signs of new threats to American security. The same analytical skills that had once made her an exceptional pilot now made her one of the military's most effective counterintelligence officers. But on clear nights, she would sometimes step outside her office and look up at the stars that had once called to her from the cockpit of a supersonic fighter. The sky still beckoned, and her restored flight status meant she could answer that call whenever duty or desire demanded. She had learned that some victories required patience, some truths demanded sacrifice, and some flights led not through clouds, but through darkness toward light that could illuminate the path for others to follow. 5 years after the Fletcher Network's collapse, Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Thompson stood on the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base, watching a new class of test pilots conduct their first supersonic flights in aircraft that represented the next generation of American air superiority. The sleek fighters climbing into the Nevada sky carried technology that had been developed using lessons learned from the intelligence compromises she had helped expose. The morning briefing had covered threat scenarios that would have been unimaginable during her early career, hybrid warfare tactics that combined cyber attacks with conventional military operations, requiring pilots who understood both digital and physical domains. The young aviators preparing for their missions had been trained using protocols that Alexis had helped develop, educated in academies reformed by her experience, and protected by systems designed to prevent the corruption that had once destroyed promising careers. Colonel Thompson called Captain Maria Santos, one of the test pilots preparing for her first flight in the new aircraft. "I wanted to thank you personally before we launch. The integrity training you developed probably saved my career last year when I had to report safety violations by a senior instructor." Santos represented everything the military had learned from the Fletcher case, a pilot trained to think independently, protected by institutional systems that valued truth over convenience, and confident that reporting wrongdoing would be met with investigation rather than retaliation. Her successful resolution of the safety issue had led to improvements that would protect countless future aviators. "Just remember," Alexis replied, "courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. You'll face decisions throughout your career where institutional pressure conflicts with your oath. Trust your training, document your concerns, and never compromise your integrity for temporary convenience." As the test aircraft disappeared into the brilliant blue sky, Alexis reflected on the journey that had brought her from disgrace to vindication, to a legacy that would protect American military personnel for generations. The path had been longer and more difficult than anything she could have imagined during her early days as a fighter pilot, but it had led to changes that strengthened the entire military establishment. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the Pentagon. Intelligence analysts had detected suspicious patterns in foreign military exercises that suggested another attempt to probe American defensive capabilities. The hybrid threat analysis unit she directed would spend the next several days determining whether the activities represented legitimate training or cover for intelligence gathering operations. The work required the same analytical skills and moral courage that had destroyed her original career and ultimately led to her vindication. But now she operated within systems designed to protect officers who asked difficult questions and challenged official narratives. The Thompson protocols ensured that evidence couldn't be easily manipulated, that multiple witnesses would review any disciplinary actions, and that digital forensics would detect attempts to alter official records. "Ma'am," said Major David Kim, her deputy director, "we're ready to begin the intelligence assessment you requested. The pattern analysis suggests coordination between multiple foreign intelligence services, possibly using the same penetration techniques that Fletcher's network facilitated." The ongoing threat meant that vigilance remained essential. Foreign Adversaries continued seeking ways to compromise American military capabilities, but their methods had evolved in response to the security improvements implemented after the Fletcher investigation. Modern corruption would require more sophisticated detection methods and more rapid response capabilities. Alexis reviewed the intelligence package on her secure workstation, her trained eye immediately identifying anomalies that suggested hostile intent hidden beneath legitimate diplomatic activities. The same intuitive understanding that had once made her an exceptional pilot now made her one of the military's most effective counterintelligence analysts. We'll need real-time monitoring of all communication channels during the next phase of their exercise, she instructed her team, and coordinate with cyber operations to detect any attempts to access classified databases during the operation. The afternoon brought a ceremony she had been invited to attend, but had initially planned to decline. The Air Force Academy was dedicating a new academic building named in honor of military personnel who had demonstrated exceptional integrity under pressure. The Integrity Hall would house classrooms where future officers would learn about ethical leadership and moral courage. Her name appeared on the building's dedication plaque alongside 17 other officers, the pilots whose careers had been destroyed by Fletcher's network but whose sacrifice had ultimately led to systematic reforms that protected countless others. The memorial wasn't about personal recognition, but about institutional learning and the continuous struggle to maintain integrity within large organizations. During the dedication ceremony, General Patricia Hayes, now the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, delivered remarks that captured the broader significance of the Fletcher case and its aftermath. The officers honored here remind us that our greatest strength isn't our technology or our firepower, Hayes told the assembled cadets and faculty. Our greatest strength is our commitment to truth, even when truth is inconvenient or dangerous. These individuals chose to uphold their oaths, even when institutional pressure demanded silence. As Alexis listened to the ceremony, she thought about the young pilots climbing into supersonic aircraft that morning, protected by systems born from her ordeal and educated in academies reformed by her experience. They would face their own challenges and moral tests, but they would do so within institutions that had learned to value integrity over convenience. The ceremony concluded with the traditional flyover, 4 F-22 Raptors in perfect formation passing overhead at precisely timed intervals. The sight brought back memories of her own early flights, when the sky had seemed infinite and her future unlimited. But she realized now that her greatest flights hadn't been through the atmosphere at Mach 2, they had been through the darkness of institutional corruption toward the light of systemic reform. That evening, alone in her office, Alexis opened the secure case that contained her flight gear. Her helmet, flight suit, and equipment remained ready for immediate use, maintained to the same standards that had once made her legendary among her peers. She had returned to flight status several times over the years, maintaining her qualifications, while building her reputation as a counterintelligence expert. But tonight, looking at the gear that represented her original dreams, she understood that her most important mission hadn't been flying fighter aircraft. It had been flying through injustice toward truth, navigating through institutional darkness toward systemic light. The black box of her experience would continue, speaking for years to come, its testimony preserved in the reformed institutions, protected personnel, and strengthened security that ensured her sacrifice had meaning beyond personal vindication. Some victories took years to achieve. Some truths required patience to emerge, and some flights carried passengers through storms they never knew existed. But the sky always remembered those who had the courage to soar, especially when their wings had been temporarily clipped by those who feared the heights they could reach. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.